So that's running. I'll maximize this. And I usually have been running this. I should actually start going back. There's a way to set the zoom without using the magnifier, which is probably a little less nausea-inducing. And actually, I think what I want to do too, instead of it being 100%, whoa, that's not what I wanted to do. Let's go back 50. I think that's should be big enough, but not quite so big. All right, are you guys? So I see a few people still. Well, so I can take some questions on joins, and then I was going to talk real quickly about the subqueries, which I did this morning. Change the dates on the subqueries, not because I needed it to be done today, but it needs to come before the other one. I had the dates reversed on a couple of assignments. So I just changed it so it would come before it. If you're not done with with joins, that's fine. Most aren't. As I said, I will try to give at least an hour to work, and I can take some questions on joins while we wait if you want. You guys have any questions? Yeah.
Quite a few.
Yeah.
Well, there's supposed to be join a whole bunch of things together, and it wasn't a linear progression. Does it still work the same way?
It can. I mean, basically, you need to make sure you join like with like. The order of the joins doesn't matter a whole lot. And you had a question?
There was one question where you wanted to list all the positions that weren't filled.
Right.
So I can figure it out by going in and searching all and seeing who hasn't used a position. But is there a way to query?
Right. It's an outer join.
It's an outer join.
Yeah. So outer joins can show you what's left. So if you return everything from the position and only matching ones from the employee position, and then look for the null,
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Right, because outer join will show up null.
Right, an outer join, if there's no matching record where that comes across, it'll be a null. And just as a hint, there's only one position that's never been.
Right.
Okay. The outer joins are the weirder ones.
I displayed everything. I had like everything as part of my select process while I was kind of narrowing down to make sure that I was coming up with the right answer, right? Because you can see, if you just do it without seeing everything, you get to the right answer. But
I found the right. I know the right answer I need, but I want to query it and have the query.
Just print it out. Oh yes. So we were talking about doing. So we did the diagram for community assist. Remember? Maybe we didn't. I may have done it.
You did it, but a lot. I think some of us couldn't do it because of permission.
Community assist you should be able to do. I'm surprised I don't have one, but I may be running.
Well, with Metro, you have to do that little trick, and I can.
Yeah.
I can show.
I can show too. I'll do that. I meant to do that.
That really helps out for doing the assignment is having a little diagram.
So I'm going to do, real quickly, I'll just do new database diagram for community assist. So I just right click on the folder. One of the things about SQL Server that could probably drive you crazy is that a lot of menus are only available by right clicking. So a lot of things are only there in the context menu. So when I add this, I'm just going to select all the things, and I just use the shift key to select everything, and I'm going to add them. And when all the tables disappear there, you can close this. And it gives you a diagram of all the relationships, which can help with the joins. All right, so that's Community Assist, and I'm going to save this. I think what I did last time is I made it and didn't save it. Business rules are hanging out there by themselves because those are really just information for me. They're not part of the structure of the database. There are things like, because there's no passwords, no plain passwords, you need to know what people's passwords are. So everybody's password is their last name plus the word pass. And that's what everybody's password is. So I right-clicked on database diagram, and I did new database diagram. It tells you that you don't have all the things that you need. You just say, yes, I do want them, and it adds the additional things. Right, Metro Alt's a different situation. I'm going to do it in 2 seconds. The reason why this works is we downloaded the script. So when we created it in this server.
With our permission.
Yeah, with your permissions. The trouble with Metro Alt is that it was created on my server at home, and when it loads here, it's still kind of alien to it. So I'm going to show you how to fix that. Did you get this to run?
I was doing it on Metro.
Oh, so with Metro Alt, before we can do, let me zoom up again one more. Before you can do Metro Alt, you have to right-click on it and go to Properties. All right. And then you want to go to Files. And we need to assign it a owner that it'll be happy with. I'm going to assign it an owner of SA and tell you that this is not a good idea in the real world. I'm giving a system administrator as the owner. The thing is, yeah. So the SA account is actually, when we use it here, I think just by making it that, it enables it, which is an issue too. But if you were to do it at home, you would have to work a little bit more on the permissions and stuff. But this gives you ownership. All right, so I'm going to do OK. Having made SA, actually, let me save this diagram real quick. And I just save them as diagram 0. You can name them whatever. Now when I go into Metro Alt and right-click on Database Diagrams, a new database diagram, it pops up this. If you get the thing that's saying you don't have everything, that's fine. Just click OK. And then I'm going to do the same. I'm going to just do a Shift, oops, and get everything. I'm going to add them all. And I'll close it, and you'll have this. Now you can rearrange it. Like, it's real hard to get it all on one screen, particularly at this zone. You can rearrange the tables, however, makes it more readable. But that's the whole database. Now, writers is separate because that was the one we imported. Fair should be attached, though. Well, you know, I didn't add a foreign key. I just added the fair key down here, but I didn't actually declare it a foreign key. I can do that. Don't know if you guys want to do that. I'm going to move this. Actually, maybe we should save that. That would be a good thing to do when we're doing tables. Let's just hold it, and I'll show you how to do it in SQL. There's a graphical way to do it, but let's wait and do it in SQL later. Structurally, the fair key is repeated in writership now, once I ran that script. So you can make the relationship there. You can make the query there, even though it's not officially a foreign key. But we'll make it a foreign key later. And again, you can save this. And I'm just going to also, that's diagram 1 now. Okay. So, and there's actually it says diagram 0. Why is it 1? Yeah, well, no, I don't think so. I still don't have a diagram here, though. Did it not save? Why is that not saved? It says it's saved. Oh, let me refresh. There it is. Okay. So, just real quick, with Metro Alt, you need to go to Properties, go to Files. I typed in SA. This is a quick, dirty solution. It is not your best bet if you're doing this in production environment, because SA is a very vulnerable account. But it gives you instant ownership. All right, so I did OK, and then you can make a diagram. And you can, as I said, when you're doing joins, these can be really, you can join anything as long as there's a path. Like if you want to get the employee's name and phone number, you have to go up here to person and then over here to contact. This is in Community Assist. But, if you want to know a person's position name, you have to go through position, employee position this. And if you want their names with their position, you could go through here up through person, right? As long as there's a path, you can join. You can make it, and you can link things together, as many as you need to. Any other questions on joins before we move forward? Most people get joins with, you said you had lots of questions. Do you remember any others? Okay. Yeah.
I was gonna say, if people want, I can show them later how to do the nice, we can print it out.
Yeah, you can print it, yeah. Did you print it directly from SQL Server, or did you copy it to?
No, what I did was I printed it from the SQL Server. Instead of doing one page, I did 4 pages. And actually put together.
Okay. One of the things about SQL Server that I don't like is it's very hard. There's no good way to export this.
Yeah.
The other thing that you should be aware of, maybe you are aware of, is that anything changes you make in here change the database. This has a live connection with the database. So if you change fields in here, change value, change data types and things, and then save it, it changes it in the underlying database. It usually will reflect the changes that you make. It won't add, like if I add a new table over here, it won't add that table, but you can always add it to the diagram by right-clicking in it and saying Add Table. So it doesn't, if you make a table outside, it doesn't automatically add it to the diagram. But if you do add a table to the diagram, it automatically adds it to the database. This is a good documentation. It's not, when you're designing a database, you really shouldn't do it where it's live like that. Yeah. With which? So do dot backslash as yeah, let's make sure. I can know because it won't, if it doesn't connect. All right, so let's look real quickly at subqueries. Or as I said, my goal is to leave you an hour or so to work on things. And we may at some, along the way, there will be certain days that I'll just say will be open labs to help you catch up to. So in general, don't panic. If you do panic, you can come visit me and we'll see what we can do about it. That makes sense? All right, so I'm going to use Community Assist. I think actually I'm going to zoom down one. So is that big enough? So I'm going to use Community Assist. I will run that. All right. A subquery is literally that. It's a query inside of a query. You can do a lot of the same things that you can do with joins, and there are a few things you can do with subqueries that you can't do with joins. Once you get the hang of subqueries, they're really flexible and powerful, but I will say they tend to confuse people initially. The easiest one, all right, say you want to know which position. Let's look at, we want to know which donor, say, and I'm just going to use the donor key or the person key. Though we could do a join here. Do you want to, well, we'll do it with the join in a moment. Select person key, and I'm going to do max donation amount. What happens when I do that? It actually, but what is the caveat there? The largest amount per person, right? So you can't get the person that does the highest amount from doing that, from donation. Right, so if I run that, I'm going to have to, first thing that'll happen is I'll get an error because I have to group by person key. And so when I do that, what I do is I get the max per person. So I get the highest donation per person, not the highest donation overall. Basically, when you're doing this, you have to just run just the max. Whoa, let's get rid of the group by. Whenever I run just the max, I get the highest donation ever made, right? I get that. But if you want to know what person did that, you really can't. You'd have to run a separate query, right? Because if you do anything up in the select, you have to group by it. And grouping by it limits it. So there is a way to do this with a subquery. I'm actually going to do, I will do the join, just for more practice on the join, just so we get their name. So we'll select person first name, person last name. Aren't you glad this equal isn't case sensitive? And then I will do donation amount. So to get the person's thing in there, I need to do a, so from person, and I'll do a P, inner join donation, and I'll do, on P dot person key equals D dot person key. That's how those two tables join. Does it confuse you when I use aliases? Would you rather I just use the table names?
No, it's fine.
What? So if I take these out, then what I have to do is write person here and donation. Okay. It is a little clearer. It just means more typing. All right. So if I do this, this just gives me the person name and everything for all the donations. This is where the subquery comes in, where donation amount equals, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a parentheses, and I'm going to say select max donation amount from donation, and then close the parentheses. So this is a complete query. This is actually the query right up there, right? And it's in the criteria. So we're going to say, we want to see the first name and last name and the donation amount for the person where that donation amount is equal to the maximum donation. Right? It'll return all the information about the donor as well as the maximum amount. So the maximum amount is 12,150. And so when we execute that, we see whoever Karen Portier is 12. They're the ones that donated 12,150.
If you've aliased the donation table on the inner join, can you not use that alias in the subquery?
Probably not. No, the subquery is independent.
Okay.
So did you try to do it from D or something?
Yeah, it wasn't terribly happy, but
I'm going to show you at the very end, probably the most confusing thing, which is the what they call a correlated subquery, where the outer query actually does talk the inner query uses a value from the outer query, so they're joined. It's basically the SQL equivalent of a recursive function. But this is totally independent.
okay.
Couple of other things. If this returns anything other than a single value, you will get an error, right? Because the equal sign can only match to one value. I'm going to show you in a minute how you can do it with multiple values. Equal, it has to return something. And the thing about max, min, sum, they all return just a single value. Even if there's only a single value there, if SQL thinks that there could be more than one, it will throw an error. Okay. So that's a simple subquery. Does that make sense? All right. Let's do, I'm going to comment it just. I'm going to show you how to do like an in. I'm trying to think of what I want to do. Well, this you could do with a join, but let's say we want to just select person address. There was street, right? I might have to look at the person address. City, maybe the person key. We could do a join here too if we want, but person key, person address zip. Was it zip or zip code? I have no memory. So we're doing person address. And I want the column, so we got state, street, city, person key, and zip. That's probably good enough. I don't care about their apartment. I actually don't care about any of it. I just want to show you something about subqueries. So let me break that a little bit. All right, so from person, I'm going to do this as kind of literal. Where and I'm going to say where person address city Why is it not giving me that? Oh, it's because I said from person is from person address. And I'm just going to, in this, I'm going to do a literal. I'm going to say, anybody remember this in Bellevue, Kent? Is there anything else? I'm trying to remember the other cities that I had that were out there. I'm going to say Shoreline, although I'm not sure it's in there. So basically, when you use the keyword in here, you can select from a list of things, and I'm going to do it as a subquery in just a moment, but I just want to show you. So everybody here is Kent, Shoreline, or Bellevue, right? So the in allows you to do it from a list of things. So then I'll do it as a subquery. This is just putting in a literal list. So trying to think of what kind of chain I want to do here. What we want to look for a list in. Let's say we want the names of the employees that are reviewing the grants. And we want to do it, you can do this simply with a join, but let's do it with subqueries. I'm going to select last name, or person last name. Person first name. Well, let's get person email in there too. All right. I'm not sure why I'm capitalizing the E so often now. All right, so we're going to do from person. So first of all, we want to see who's an employee. So I'm going to say where person key in, and then I will do select person key from employee, and we'll run that first. All right, couple of things about this. Again, this is a in, so this is going to return a list of things, and it's going to match anything that's in that list. It's really important that you're searching for the same thing, right? Person key, you're looking for the person key that's in there. It's just like a join, in that you're basically looking for likes. Person key is in person, and that's also what ties the person to employee. So if we do this at this point, what we're going to get is the first name, last name of all of the employees. Sure. The one above it?
Yeah.
So that's a subquery that returns a list of values, the select person key from employee. And again, we're using the in keyword. The in means that it's in the list. Right? If it's in the list, return it. It's not returning. There's like 180 people in the person list. And it's only returning those whose person keys are in the employee table. Does that make sense? So if we want to see which ones are doing the reviews, if we look at the grant reviews, there's an employee key there. So I'm going to just copy this one and we'll expand it a little bit. So I'm going to say where employee key in, and we'll start another subquery. So select employee key from grant review. So basically we're creating a chain of these. So this one returns all of the employees. Now we're seeing if they're employees in the grant review. So we'll only see those employees that have done grant reviews. Does that make sense? So let's just run that. So those 3 employees have done grant reviews. And you could chain this on, as long as there's a path. It's just like a join. As long as a path is. Now the drawbacks of this, I can't actually display any fields from the subqueries. You can only display from the top query. So you don't, in a join, you could bring back everything, right? Here you can only bring back from the first table. Sometimes subqueries are more efficient than joins if you're having performance problems. Just, although SQL Server has a built-in optimizer that would rearrange it anyway if it needed to. But does that make sense? I mean, we're just chaining along, just kind of like the joins do. It's sort of like each inner join, you have to say how things are related. Person key is related to person key and employee. Employee key is related to the employee key and grant review. It's just showing how those 2 things relate. And if you do unlike things, you could maybe get it to work. Like if I did where employee key equals grant review key, we'd get something back, but it would be garbage. Does that make sense?
I mean, this is an example of chain aware.
Yeah. And they're separate, so maybe a different, let's bring, this is all, where we do, and just breaking out the, I notice that it's a subquery and a subquery and a subquery, and it ends with 2 parentheses. Usually what happens if you do multiples of these is, if you have an error, it's usually you don't have enough parentheses.
So if we ran another subquery inside.
Probably. I mean, I'm not sure that there's anything else related out here to do it to, but. So just a couple more things I want to show for, these are all in the where clause. I'm going to show you, you can do subqueries in the select clause too. But before I do that, I want to show one other, it has the same effect as an outer join, exactly. So I am going to say select, what do we call these, GrantType. Select GrantType name. From GrantType. Weird random capitals. I'll break the line just, all right. Where GrantType key not in select, and I guess I should break that line too. Select grant type key, key from grant request. Why is everything?
You need another key.
Yeah.
Oh. And then this one has 2 of them too. We should capitalize this one probably so it makes it clearer. All right, so this has exactly the same effect, except now I have 3 T's in GrantType. Exactly the same effect as an outer join. Whoa.
You missed the SE.
Yeah, and I also didn't hit F5. I hit something else.
Those are the nulls.
Yeah. Those are the nulls. Those are the things that nobody ever requested. That's exactly the same thing that you get with an outer join. I actually think this is easier to write than an outer join. Because we're looking for everything, every grant key that is not in this set. Does that make sense? So if it's not in that set, that means nobody ever requested it. All right, I'm going to build up, do one in the selects now. Are these making sense? They're not horrible, as I said, and they can be really flexible when you get the hang of them. And they, again, they do similar things to the joins. So I'm going to make a little bit of a difference here, but are you guys ready? I'm going to put the selects in the select clause. I'm going to put some things. So say we wanted, I am going to select I'll do the grant type name. All right, and then I want to do some grant request amount. And then, and I'll just name it as total. Okay, so we're going to do from grant type, I guess, inner join grant type dot grant type key on just inner join grant. So we got that inner join grant request. Sorry, I'm thinking ahead of myself. On grant type dot grant type key equals grant request dot grant type key. So we're going to modify this in a moment, but we can run this, and then so I'm just going to do, and then we'd have to group by, right? Group by grant type name. If we do this, what it will give us is the total of grants for each kind of grant that have been granted. That's the total per grant. So that's actually pretty good. But what if you wanted to see the grand total as well? There's no way within this structure you could do that, right? To see the grand total other than run a separate query, which is right where a subquery comes in. So we've got grant type. We've got some grant type. I'm going to break that because I'm going to do a couple of things here. I'm going to add another field. I am going to say select some grant request amount. From grant request, and I'm going to alias it as grand total. All right. So if I do that, I can get the subtotal basically for each type, and then there's a grand total. There's no way to just display it once, but does that make sense? So I've put a subquery in the select as another field, right? A whole subquery is another field. I'm going to do a couple of other things that are where it's really confusing. Say you wanted to know what percentage this is of that. So this is the part where things might go awry for things. So I am going to say sum grant request amount divided by, actually, yeah, would it be divided? No. Yeah, it's divided by the whole, the part divided by the whole. And then I'm going to do select sum grant request amount from grant request. I think I'm going to break this here and maybe indent it a little. And we'll give this as a percent, although actually to get a full percent, you would then multiply all of this by 100, right? And actually percent is a key word, so we should probably. So let's see what we get when we do that. And then I'll walk through it again. So these are the percentage that each one is, right? Now there are things you could do. We could format all of this. If you want to make this query really get long and bizarre, we can add the formatting code to make everything into dollars and percentages and things like that. I won't do that right now. But you can. And let's say we wanted the average too. What would we want as the average though? What the average donation is? I mean, you could add that in there too. The average donation per type, and then the overall average, whatever. You can really add anything you want. This is, as you can see, this is really valuable for summary kinds of stuff. Does that make sense? So what we have, let's walk through again. So we're just getting the grant type name. That's just by itself. The sum grant request total, that's in the basic query. That's what the group by is for. So we're grouping by grant type name, and then this first sum is just the sum per grant type. The second sum is the total amount of all donations. And then we get that through a subquery. So it's not subject to the group by, right? It's just returning the grand total of everything. When we do the local sum grant request amount, again, it's the one that's grouped by, so it's the smaller amount. And then we divide it by the total amount. That's how you get the percent. It would be a decimal, but if you multiply it by 100, it gives you percent. The word percent actually literally means per 100, per centum. So I just wanted to show you this has real possibilities, but how confused are you? A bit, huh? Questions? I won't keep building it up. Okay, so what is the error message? Did you get percent? But let's see what it does. Did you do the image? Oh, you got it right. Well, you can't do it. It would be from the, it would be from always refers to.
Oh no, well, Ada hasn't gotten this sort of thing.
That would be like,
Yeah, I think that's all it was. It's actually, it's really normal at the main error. Because I grouped the two things together. Yeah, well, the trouble with the error message. Yeah. So far, all the errors I've seen are parentheses or commas, which is not atypical. And I've done this before too. I've looked at it something like this, and I've gone over and over and over it, and there's nothing wrong with the logic. You know, I do it with programming code too. Sometimes I go, spend hours. What is wrong with this? And then you walk away and you come back and you say, oh, I forgot a comma. I forgot a semicolon. You know, it's just, and the error messages don't tell you that. They tell you that the word after the parentheses is wrong, right? Or they'll give you a, you know, it doesn't quite give you what you hoped. So I'm going to leave this one at this, but just to let you know, I mean, again, you can make, when you're building reports, this is really useful for building reports, you know, getting all the summary kind of information. And some of it is not doable except through subqueries. Right, getting the grand total with the total, it's pretty hard to do without a subquery. You guys have any questions on it? Did it make sense? I mean, figuring this out, how to work it, I realize I went through it really kind of quickly, but if you think of it step by step. And the other thing I would do when you're building these, because I do think I have one of those to build for you, when you're building these, do them step by step. Add one thing, test it, add another thing, test it, rather than trying to write it all out. And
That's
then,
what I do is in the assignment, I go once and I say, this is the final answer.
yeah. I mean, because if you know it works up to the most recent thing you've added, then you know that the problem is in the recent thing you've added. Right? So it's always a good idea to build things step by step, piece by piece. All right. So these are, I'm just going to say select subqueries in the select. Later, we're not doing it today. I'll show you, there's a thing called, yeah, just drew a blank. It's the next big topic though. There are things that have subqueries in the from clause, right? Because what you're doing is you're querying a query, basically. And we'll do that later. I think they're called table expressions. That's what they're called, table expressions. And these, all this, for all of its weirdnesses, there's nothing that we've done so far this quarter that is unique to SQL Server. There will be some things we do later that are, but everything here you can do in any environment, any database management system. All right, so this is the weird one. This is a correlated subquery. And it's somewhat like a recursive function in a programming language. How many of you have ever done a recursive function? Not a lot. Okay. A recursive function is a function that calls itself. Right, so you basically write a function and it calls itself. It creates a loop.
It's kind of like you're cheating. You try to get by sheer iteration.
It gives you, it's basically a way of doing an iteration and doing a calculation each iteration.
You don't have quite all the information, but you get enough to where.
Yeah, and there are some problems, some famous problems where a recursive function is your best solution. Every programming textbook I've ever read and every book on SQL I've ever read says that if you can avoid a correlated subquery, if you can avoid a function, avoid it, avoid the recursive. And the reason is that they are intensely CPU, they use a lot of CPU cycles, right? And they can take forever to work out. So that being said, I want to show you a correlated subquery, at least one, because if you ever go to a job and they give you a whiteboard exercise in SQL, the chances are it'll be a correlated subquery because they're hard and because they're rare. So what a correlated subquery is basically where the inner query references the outer query. Okay, and they can do some neat things when you do that. So the inner query references the outer query. So if we wanted to look at the, what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically do select average, except we're not going to do this quite, but we're going to select the average. Let's do, actually just select average. Should we do donation? No, let's do average request, grant request. I keep saying average. I want to do grant request. Having average grant request are having grant requests greater than average. That's what I want. And so it should be not grant request. select, I'm really messing up here, but select grant request amount from grant request. Having a grant request amount greater than the average. I'm not even sure this will work, actually. Grant request amount. Does that come up with something? No. I thought that might not work. We want to know which ones are greater than the average.
Why don't you simply grab and go
What?
do a star real quick just to get the report.
Just here?
Yeah, do a select.
Oh,
Grant request, just get the tables and then probably get the feel for the problem.
right. Well, part of the problem is if I were to get the average, and if I were to get a having greater than the average, is that there are different grant types, and we would be mixing apples and oranges, right? So a request for rent is obviously going to have a different kind of average than a request for
Oh, so you want
food.
So you want one part to do the average of the whole types, then
We want to average, right?
Individual entry do the grant request greater than the
Yeah, so we want to
type.
get the average per type.
Oh, good.
Yeah, but and a correlated subquery can do this. This one, I'm not sure how we get that to work. Having a grant request, I think we would have to. If we do a grant request, this is not the problem. This was to show what the problem doesn't solve. I wonder if I do group by. Grant request amount. It might allow. That still doesn't like that. Well, maybe. It gave me nothing. So let's just do grant request key. I think it will work for that. It's not going to be very meaningful, but I think this might actually work. No, it doesn't like it. So let's ignore that. Let's just do the correlated subquery. So we want to do select. We can put a fields in here. Grant request key.
Well, Steve, what about you do this? Do one this dummy query real quick, just to where you find out what the average grant request amount is by type.
Well, we could do that.
And then just blend it in. But it's
Well, let's do this though. Let's do grant request amount. We'll just do the correlated subquery and then we'll break it. Grant request type key. Now I could do joins up here, but I don't want to mess this up. I mean, make it more complicated than it is. All right, so we're just going to get the grant request key, the grant request type key, the grant request amount from grant request. Okay, and then we'll say where, or I think it has to be in.
grant type key, right?
Yeah, grant type key. Thank you. Where from grant request where grant request trying to remember the, you know what I did for just this reason, because I never write these.
That's what you have to blog.
Yep. Yeah, so I'm just going to paste it and then we'll walk through it. I could work it out, but it's going to take me a while. This is faster. All right, so I got the grant type key and the grant request amount from grant request, and I alias the table. This is one time where you have to alias the table, because we're going to do another query from the same table, but we're going, so we want to do it where the grant request amount is greater than, and then what we want then is to do the select average of the grant request amount from grant request GR2, where the grant type key from the first one, the outer query, is equal to the grant type key from the inner one. What that means is that food will be compared to food, rent will be compared to rent, right? So let's go, I will run that. I'll let you guys do it too. But. I mean, what we'll do is we'll see if it's working in just a second. I mean, it is working in that it's returning stuff. But we'll see if these are actually greater than the average for one, if these are greater than the average for two, right? So this is where the inner query references the outer query, right? It's saying that the grant, because the outer query is aliased as GR1. This is saying where the grant type key in GR1 is equal to the grant type key in the inner query. So basically it's checking to see, are we on food? And then it's going to do the average of food. It's going to check, it's just going to keep checking to make sure that they're matched. So if we look, I'm going to do select average grant request amount from grant request, and we'll say where grant type key equals 1. All right, so the average for grant type key 1 is, if we execute that, it's 128, right? So when we do these, the ones that are higher, that's 600, 200, 128.50. When I execute, it's just 128.46, so it's just a couple pennies higher than the average. If I do it for 2, I'm going to run both of these together. So 2 is, we have the 1,200, 850, 800. And if we go down, the average is 658. So these are grants that are higher, but what it's doing is it's differentiating between the different types of grant, right? It's doing the average per type. And the reason it's doing the average per type is that the inner query is referencing the outer query to make sure that they're in sync with the types. Does that make sense? As I say, correlated subqueries are rare, but they can be. This kind of thing is something you couldn't really do without it.
So when we enter the where grant type key is whatever, where it's pulling from that.
Right, because notice we aliased it as GR1.
Um,
So this says where GR1 grant type key, so the outer one, is equal to, and this one is aliased as GR2. So it's equal to GR2 grant type key. So where the outer grant type key is the same as the inner grant type key, right in the inner. You're obviously still dubious. I wonder if I could draw a picture. I don't know if I could or not. Yeah.
Well, that's the same thing. I was really thinking about.
You got different values?
Yeah.
Let me see. So you got yeah. Well, I have grant type. Oh, that's. I think that's what the.
Okay.
The difference is there.
I still get it.
It is, and these are a little bit complicated. As I said, it can give you recursive functions are the same kind of thing. You have a function calling itself, and then the trick is you have to give it an exit image.
Can you maybe reiterate like, where like this is the like what is
Where the what?
the 658 like
So the 658 is for grant type 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I did is I got the average. If I look at, so 2 is rent, I think. Right, so the average request for rents is 658.
On the second query, just do a group by grant type, and that way, and run both queries, that way you have the split query.
All right, so if I do grant type,
Just group by grant type.
or grant type key, and then we'll, instead of doing this, we'll just group by. Why is it not like grant type key?
No, you have the average, so just, the average is good enough, take out the first grant.
Well, I want to see the thing. It should work. It should run that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why
Do you need
it's.
a comma in between grant type key
I
and
do
average?
indeed. Thank you.
I fixed it.
Yes, you did. Good job. All right, so these are the averages per. The averages per, right? Oh. All right, so these are the averages per type. And then if we were to run these, so if we run them together, so these are the averages per type. So 1 is 128. When we come down, I have to scroll down. Did it run both of them? I only have the one running.
You gotta select both.
Yeah, I thought I did.
Your second one seems to have disappeared.
Oh, you deleted it. Oh, yeah. Control delete.
Yeah. I'm not doing well. I did select them both. Why did it not run both? All right, let's do it this way. All right, so there's, and I can kind of stretch this up for a moment. So GrantType 1, the average is 128.46. And type 1 I know is food. So these are the ones that are above that amount. One was way above, 600, 200, 128, right? Those are all above the 128.46. That one's above because it's 128.50. Right, it's just barely above. GrantType 2, we have 1200, 850, and 800. The average for GrantType 2 is 658. So each of those is above that average. That's what we asked for, the grants that were higher than the averages. And you might want to know that because they're kind of outliers, and you might wonder why did they get that much. 3 is 220. So under 3, we have quite a few. There's 250, 250, 250. Yeah. So those are all grants that are higher than the average. And then again, 4 is, the average for 4 is 179. So these are all higher than that average. Does that make sense, sort of? The trick, the whole reason we did this was so that you weren't comparing rents to food on the request, right? Or that you weren't comparing, I'm trying to think of what some of the childcare to rent, right? Because the amounts are going to be unlike. It's, a lot of times a straight average doesn't tell you a lot. Does that make sense? You need the average per type. And if you're looking for something like which ones are higher, or we could do which ones are lower than the average. You could look for that. There's other things you could do. We could count the number that were higher, things like that. But the point of the subquery, now let me drag that down, of the correlated subquery is just to make sure food is compared to food, rent is compared to rent, childcare is compared to childcare, but they aren't compared to each other. And I'm not sure of a way to do that without a correlated subquery. You could do it with a whole bunch of queries, right? I mean, you could make a bunch of different queries and just get the values and then compare them. So this is the hardest one to comprehend, I'm sure. For what it's worth, I also find recursive functions confusing. Sometimes they're really useful. And it is recursive because every time you run this one, you have to run this one, right? It keeps calling this one. Every time the inner one runs, it calls the outer one. All right, I think what I will do, I will post this code and let you have the last hour here to work. And you can work on the joins if you haven't finished that, right? And we can revisit this. I'll try to think of a better explanation. Also in the blog, which I think I'm going to steal the comment from there, there's a long comment about this, which would probably bear being repeated. When I repost it. All right, let me copy and paste this into the I'm also going to stop the video at this point, which isn't